Hello, you are on the channel Vovich the Grandpa. Today I will try to answer a question that interests quite a lot of people. What tools do you need to start working with wood? First, I will answer briefly. A saw and a knife. Now I will try to give a detailed answer why, in my opinion, beginners need so few tools. There are already quite a few videos on YouTube in which the authors have explained what tools are needed. Many of their authors more or less agree in their opinions and often indicate the same hand tools. Others are clearly going too far and piling up a whole mountain of expensive electrical equipment. But in pursuit of an answer to the question, what tools do I need to start working with wood? People miss the meaning of the key words, to start working. It is logical to assume that if a person asks such a question, then he clearly does not know how to work with these tools. The person clearly doesn't know how to plane, saw, drill. He clearly hasn't worked with a chisel. Most likely, he hasn't even heard of such a word. And when a beginner goes on YouTube in search of a starter kit and sees that he supposedly needs a whole mountain of tools, his hands may clearly drop and all desire may disappear. The reason is simple. Tools cost money and good tools can be very expensive. And it often happens that money doesn't come out of nowhere, so you need to start small. Listen to me, an old man who has been working with wood for many years and once upon a time began his journey with a used knife and saw. Look, you can't learn to run without learning to walk, and you can't learn to walk without learning to stand. It's exactly the same in work. You start with something relatively simple, then gradually gain experience, and after that you complicate the process. So why should a beginner spend a lot of money on a starter set of tools if you can get by with a minimal amount at first? So my advice to you, if you want to start with a saw and a knife. But keep in mind that it is really difficult to make complex and beautiful things with such a kit. But you should always start with something simple. If you have some kind of fixed idea, then put it off until later, when you have enough experience and tools. In the meantime, start with a basic acquaintance with wood. Take wood in your hands, cut the first shaving, feel its aroma. Let your big journey begin with a small step, and the first step is to acquire your first tools. To begin with, you can work with tools that you inherited from the older generation, brother, father, grandfather. If you have nothing at all, you will have to buy it. I will not dwell on brands, since they do not play the main role. Always start from your wallet. For me, it is always better to buy 3 to 4 tools of average quality than 10 to 20 of, frankly, poor quality or one single expensive branded tool. Can you afford to buy an expensive tool? Do it. Can't buy even an average quality one? Then it's better to save up some money and not buy a bad tool. A bad tool is always a waste of money and negative emotions. So, what kind of first saw would you buy? In my opinion, the first saw should have a number of specific characteristics in order to relatively fully satisfy your needs. The first characteristic is the handle. It should be of a certain shape, have a perpendicular stop and an angular bevel relative to the saw blade. Because of such a handle, the saw can be used as a square and for drawing 90 and 45-degree angles on wood. The saw blade itself can also be used as a ruler. The handle should also be made of high-quality plastic or wood and should not flutter or wobble when sawing. When buying, take the saw in your hand and shake it like this. Listen to see if the saw makes any strange sounds. Their presence may indicate that the saw blade is not fastened properly in the handle. The handle should also fit well in your hand. The second characteristic is the size of the saw tooth. When choosing a saw, look for a number with the letters TPI on the package. This is the number of saw teeth per inch of the blade. The higher this number, the more teeth fit in 1 inch, but the teeth themselves become smaller. Small teeth leave a better quality cut of wood, but you need to saw longer. And meanwhile, large teeth cut faster, but the cut becomes more jagged. I think that you need to start with a value of 7 to 9 TPI. This is approximately the golden mean. The third characteristic is the shape of the saw tooth. I won't go into detail here, just remember that the tooth should have approximately this shape. As a rule, such a tooth has a double-sided sharpening, which allows you to saw both when pushing the saw and when pulling the saw towards you. The fourth characteristic is the uniformity of the saw tooth. There are saws where there are special holes in the saw blade at certain intervals for the ejection of chips. I think that it is not worth buying such a saw yet, since you will not need to saw very much and for a long time. The fifth characteristic is the length of the saw blade. I recommend purchasing a saw with a blade length approximately equal to the length from your elbow to your fingers. The advantage of a long saw is that it can make a longer cut in one movement than a short saw. It is easier to make one long movement than 2 to 3 short ones, which saves effort and time. And a long saw is less likely to jump out of the board being cut than a short saw. The advantages, I think, are obvious, but if the price does not allow, you can buy a shorter saw. This concludes the basic requirements for the saw, then look at what you can afford. And remember, this is only your first and most likely far from the last saw. With experience, you will understand that you will be forced to purchase other saws. Okay, we've sorted out the choice of saw. Now I'll tell you what kind of knife you need. As in the case of a saw, this tool should also have certain characteristics. The first characteristic is one-sided sharpening of the blade. This allows you to take hold of the blade with your second hand for better control over the knife when cutting. You can also hit the blade with a hammer, mallet, or just a stick when splitting wood along the grain. The second characteristic is a straight or arced bevel to the tip of the blade in the style of Japanese tanto. Such a bevel makes it possible to improvise wood planing and, at first, do without a plane. Of course, this is not a full-fledged replacement for a plane, but until you have no A-plane 1 and you can't work with it, you can at least process the torn surface of the wood with a knife. The third characteristic is the uniformity of the cutting edge. Do not buy a knife with a serration, a wavy or saw-toothed blade shape, even if it occupies only part of the cutting edge. Usually, the serration is located in the area of the blade that is most actively used when cutting. Working with wood, it will not be possible to cut with a serration as needed, so there is no need for serration. The fourth characteristic is the form factor. The knife must be non-folding. The tang and blade of the knife must be a single piece of metal. Never buy a folding or retractable knife, no matter how reliable the manufacturer claims it is. I don't recommend knives in which the tang is fused or glued into the handle, since the obvious length of the tang is not visible. It is very likely that in such a knife the tang is only a few centimeters. Under heavy load, the handle may not withstand and break. For greater reliability, take a knife whose tang takes up the entire handle. The fifth characteristic is the thickness of the blade. I recommend a thickness of about 2 to 3 millimeters. A thinner blade can bend under load, and a thicker blade is usually less sharp due to its sharpening angle. The sixth characteristic is the handle. The handle should be reliable and strong, tenaciously and securely sit in the hand and not slip under load. I usually use knives where the handle is just 2 riveted pieces of wood. The seventh characteristic is the length of the blade. The length should be about the length of your palm or shorter. A short blade is easier to control, but a long knife is easier to clean bark from wood and to work with 2 hands, like a draw knife. Okay, we've sorted out the tools, but what else would you have besides a knife and a saw? A regular graphite pencil for marking. You can also buy a pencil sharpener for quick sharpening. A piece of sandpaper measuring 20 by 10 centimeters and 40 grit for rough sanding of uneven wood. A second piece of sandpaper of about the same size and 100 grit for smoother sanding. A pair of soft work gloves to protect your hands from splinters. And finally, a piece of soft wood about 1 meter long. You shouldn't buy expensive wood right away. For now, limit yourself to the most affordable. On this piece, you will practice sawing and planing, doing basic operations when working with wood. And that's it. A brief initiation into working with wood is over. I hope I have clearly explained my vision of where to start. Subscribe to the channel and write in the comments if you want more videos like this. This was Vovich the Grandpa with you. See you soon.